Hello and welcome back. I am so glad that you could join me today because I have just received some pretty exciting news and I think you're gonna want to see it. So here, you know what? Why don't you follow me into my study? I have been studiously learning everything that I can about the new features that were just announced, including conducting experiments of sorts on a bizarre new head that I found in the Nether. But let's not get ahead of ourselves, because before we get to that, we need to talk about a very exciting change that they've just made to the Chiseled Bookshelf. If you've been following these snapshots up to this point, you'll know that Mojang has been slowly implementing tweaks to these bookshelves since their initial release. For example, just a couple of weeks ago, they added a new hopper compatibility so that hoppers can feed books in and pull books out, which was a really exciting addition. And one of my main critiques at the time was that I really wanted more control over where I could place a book within the shelf itself. Previously, when you placed the book in a chiseled bookshelf, regardless of where you place the book, they would fill up the shelf left to right, top to bottom, in that order, and you could only remove them in that order as well. And at the very least, visually, this meant that if we wanted to decorate with these new blocks, we'd be left with something that looked very grid-like. There are really only 7 different combinations you can work with at this point, and eventually it kind of becomes difficult not to notice. But now, they've changed this by making it so that books can be added or removed from any slot by specifically targeting one of the 6 slots just like that. I mean, what more can you ask for? This is incredible. It's such a simple and yet very satisfying change that so many of us were asking for, and they did it. Well done. So now we can mix and match books to visually fill up a space in really whatever creative way we choose to tell a story or create a unique pattern, and just from what I've been able to create here in this interior, I am already beyond satisfied with these changes. The way I've been able to customly set up these shelves really sets the vibe here. And by the way, I did the math on this, whereas before there were only 7 combinations, there are now a total of 64 combinations of ways that you can fill up a single bookshelf. That's a full stack of unique combinations. Nice. Now, the creative builder in me is already content with these changes, but this also has some really great implications for Redstone as well. If you'll remember, when chiseled bookshelves are used with a comparator, they output a redstone signal based on the last slot that you interacted with. So if we had an empty shelf and we added a book to the first slot, it would output a signal of 1. And previously, this meant we could only add a signal in a very linear and sequential fashion, by adding 1 book at a time, with each book increasing the signal by 1. And then if you wanted to remove a book for the purpose of changing the redstone signal in the other direction, for let's say a combination lock, for example, the signal wouldn't change right away. You'd have to remove 2 books to change the signal. So if you had placed 5 books into the shelf, then the last slot you interacted with would be slot 5, so your redstone output would also be 5. And then if you removed a book, the redstone signal would still be 5, because once again, the last slot you interacted with was, you guessed it, slot 5. And you wouldn't really have much of a choice in the matter, because you could only add and remove books in one way, last in and first out. Which honestly isn't very useful in my opinion, especially when you're trying to create some kind of unique combination to open up a secret hidden door like they showed off at Minecraft Live. So now with the ability to add and remove books from a specific slot, the comparator can output a redstone signal with much more variability. So if I needed to output a series of redstone signals, let's say 3, 5, 1, and 3 in that order for a combination lock, I could do so by adding the first 3 books to each slot in that order, and then end with removing the 3rd book that I initially added to complete the combination. And I could do that regardless of what the state of the bookshelf was currently in. If the shelf was already filled in some random order, I could still accomplish this by interacting with those slots in whatever way was needed to complete the combination. That is incredible to me. I mean, that's so neat. The chiseled bookshelf feels exponentially more useful than it was previously. And I can actually see it being used now in more ways than I previously could have possibly imagined. The only change I'd still like to see would be more control over the color, or even just the appearance of the books in the shelf, so that we can visually see where specific types of books are. If enchanted books were purple, for example, or maybe if they just had a unique shine like other enchanted items, I think then we'd be able to find those books a little bit more easily. As far as visual and technical changes are concerned, I truly believe the bookshelf is honestly perfect as it is. But when it comes to using the shelves for storage and organization, I do think it probably needs just a few more tweaks. And with that being said, there are a few unique characteristics given to some of the books when it comes to sounds. If you listen closely, when you place regular books into the shelf, it has a unique sound. And then when you place an enchanted book in, there you go, it makes its own unique sound as well. Which I really like, that's definitely a step in the right direction. And I'll also mention that you can only place books into the shelf directly from the front face of the shelf now, which makes sense. Before, you could place them in by hand from any direction, which didn't really make a whole lot of sense to me. So now if you tried to do that, nothing would happen. And don't worry, that doesn't apply to hoppers, they can still input from any face of the block. Alright, let's move on to another visual change before we address the Piglin Head in the room. Here, follow me outside, we'll make this quick. I actually just finished gathering a bunch of bamboo from a recent visit to a nearby bamboo jungle, which gives me the perfect opportunity to show you a few new aesthetic changes that have been made to the bamboo block. Okay, right away, the first thing we can clearly see is a color change to the end texture of the bamboo blocks. It's subtle, but it's a great change. Previously, both the bamboo block and the strip block of bamboo had the exact same yellowish texture on both ends. So it kind of looked like the ends of the green bamboo block had already been stripped. So now it has its own unique green hue to it to set it apart from its stripped variant, which looks really nice. And then in addition to the contrast of color between the two blocks, which I find most notable, the overall texture of both blocks has also been tweaked, which also includes the texture of the planks as well. It's a bit difficult to tell at first unless you're looking at a side-by-side comparison, but it's definitely noticeable. And if you look closely, we can actually see that they've changed the plank texture to try and better match the tiling pattern of other planks. I'm still not entirely sure how I feel about it. The goal here is clearly to try and make bamboo planks more compatible with other wooden planks, but the real question in my mind is, do they need to be? At this point, I think they work really well as their own standalone block, and I've already seen several builds out there where they've been worked in really nicely with other blocks. So although I think these changes are fitting, I do wonder if getting them to line up perfectly with planks is really going to make that much of a difference. Honestly, I don't really know though, so we'll just have to wait and see. Let me know what you think. Okay, let's not delay this any further. We need to talk about what is going on with mob heads. At this point, you've probably seen an image online of a piglin head on top of a note block and wondered, what the heck is going on here? Well, it appears that some kind of strange new technology has been added to the game, one that allows note blocks to extract and play the ambient sounds of various creatures from our world. Or something like that. As of the latest snapshot, if we place a mob head on top of a note block, that note block will now play one of the ambient sounds of that mob. How neat is that? And it works for every head in the game. That is so cool. This is going to add so many creative ways to add ambient sounds to your world without directly needing the mobs themselves to, be around. And the obvious thing I can see this being used for is pranking other people on a multiplayer world, especially with the creeper sounds. Alright, that's just mean. A lot of people are going to have fun with that one. But I'm actually more interested in the world building aspect of these changes, especially since note blocks can be powered by redstone. So you could make a haunted house where certain skeleton or zombie sounds play on a loop. Or you could have a tripwire or a pressure plate trigger a creeper sound for a jump scare. Or let's say you were building some kind of treacherous dragon's lair in the overworld. With the dragon head, you could have something set up so that every so often a dragon roars, striking fear into anyone who enters. Oh my goodness, that is loud and pretty terrifying. There are some really clever options here that players could use to tell all kinds of interesting stories, including using the brand new Piglin Head. Oh man, okay, I've been holding off too long on this one. The new Piglin Head looks amazing. Aside from the dragon head, the Piglin Head has so much more detail and three-dimensionality to it. Just as a decorational block, this head already stands out against all the others. It looks so nice. And the angry sounds it makes when powering the note block is perfect. That's so cool, I can't get over it. And of course, we can also wear it on our head like a helmet. And look at that, the head flaps its ears when I'm walking, that's so neat. This really makes me wish Mojang would add more animation like this to player movement. Just having the ears flap like this when I'm walking adds so much life to my character. We need more animation like this. And look at this, if we place the Piglin Head down and apply a redstone signal to it, it flaps its ears while it's stationary as well. So I could just have this on a shelf somewhere as a piece of decor, and all the while its ears are just flapping away. It's so nice to have a little bit of extra movement happening in the background, I like that. This has me so hyped for the potential for other mob heads to be added to the game as well at some stage. I personally would love to see them add an Enderman head, or maybe even a creepy spider head. Or, while we're on the subject of Nether mobs, they could add the Hoglin head. I mean, I feel like that would be a really great addition. Really, any hostile mob in the game that the player is meant to kill has the potential of having its head added to the game at some point. Which begs the question, which head would you like to see added? Let me know in the comments. But here's the catch. This is all fun to play around with in the comfort of a creative world. But what if you're playing the game as intended in a survival world? How would you get one of these things? And that, of course, is where the challenge lies. Because currently, in the game, to acquire the heads of skeletons, zombies, and creepers, you have to strategically find a way for them to be killed by a charged creeper. It is a whole process. You need to find a trident, enchant it with channeling, wait patiently for a thunderstorm to appear, use the trident to strike a creeper with lightning, and then carefully get it to blow up another mob. And if you're lucky and all goes according to plan, then you'll finally have your very first mob head. And you only get one per explosion, so you better make it count. There are a few ways of doing this, but yeah, it's a challenge. Now, to do all of this with a piglin, we have even more of a challenge to overcome, because piglins cannot exist in the overworld. If you try to bring one over, they'll just get sick and turn into a zombified piglin within 15 seconds of arriving. So once we have a charged creeper, we're gonna have to find a way to get it into the nether safely and then blow up a piglin in the nether. That, or maybe we could bring the piglin to the overworld and have a charged creeper quickly blow it up before it's able to turn. Honestly, this is going to be quite an interesting challenge to pull off. And the Piglin Head is probably going to be more of a trophy item than anything else, just to represent the accomplishment of acquiring it in the first place. I gotta say, I'm really happy they've added this to the game. It feels like so much in terms of gameplay experience has been added with just the single addition of the Piglin Head alone. And as far as acquiring it is concerned, challenge accepted. Okay, so the last thing I want to share with you involves some changes to the way mobs spawn in the Nether. For as long as I can remember, mobs like the Enderman, the Skeleton, and the Wither Skeletons would spawn here in the Nether at a light level of 11 and below, which is pretty bright. The maximum light level in the game is 15 and complete darkness is 0. So at a light level of 11, hostile mobs are going to be spawning all the time, even if you have things fairly lit up. But now they've changed so that specifically Endermen, Skeletons, and the Wither Skeletons only spawn at a light level of 7 and below. By default, much of the Nether where these mobs normally spawn is still pretty dark, so I do think they'll still spawn naturally in good amounts, even in areas with some natural lighting. But the main reason for this change is actually intended to nerf certain player-made portal-based mob farms. I'll be honest though, I don't really know enough about the farms in question, so I'll leave that to the technical players to provide their feedback. And guess what? You're not going to believe this. There are only 2 creative inventory changes this time around. They reordered the Redstone tab, again based on more feedback, and they added rails to the Tools and Utilities tab next to minecarts. And that's it. I think the creative inventory may actually be complete now. And finally, there are a ton of technical changes in this snapshot, most of which include some big changes to the way Mojang collects your data while you play the game. So listen, how games collect your data is always an important topic of conversation, and they've included several pages outlining how they'll be doing that with some newly added telemetry events. It's a lot to cover, so I'll leave a link in the description for you to read up on it on your own if you'd like. They also added some new commands, including a fill biome command that allows you to change the biome entry for a specific area. That's pretty neat. And of course, there are lots of bug fixes. And that is it. Thank you all so much for joining me today. This was probably one of my favorite snapshots yet, and I love the changes that they made to the Chiseled Bookshelves, and the new Piglin Head was a complete surprise to me. I am so hyped for what is still to come, and once the sniffer is added, we are going to be on a whole nother level. Anyway, I do hope you enjoyed this week's snapshot. If you enjoyed the video, hit that like button, and subscribe, it's free. And hey, if you do, not only will you be helping me get this channel off of the ground, but you'll also be making it so that you don't miss out on future snapshot videos. I think that's a pretty good deal. Anyway, as always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.